The second age of Martech. Over to you, Scott.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you. So yeah, just a very brief introduction. I kind of wear two hats in the industry for, oh my goodness, 15 years or so. I've been a bit of, I guess you'd call it an armchair analyst of the marketing technology industry. Write the blog chiefmartech.com. I launched the Martech conference in 2014, wrote a book about this stuff called Hacking Marketing. And yeah, probably you might know me from versions of this crazy landscape that I've curated over the years of just trying to track all of the different marketing technology solutions in the world. The other hat I wear is I used to be a SaaS entrepreneur myself. I built a SaaS product for marketers at a company called Ion Interactive to create interactive content. And then after that company was acquired, I moved over and joined HubSpot, where I lead their platform ecosystem. So what I wanted to do today was, share with you a model. I've been thinking about here of like the first age of Martech and the second age of Martech. And I'm not going to go into presentation mode here because I want to keep this open conversational. Please feel free to jump in as we go through this. I'd say maybe it's about 8 minutes or so to just walk you through this model, and then we'll have it very much as an open Q&A. So when I think about the first age of Martech, which is kind of like the first 2 decades of this century, it struck me that it was really about dichotomies. Like in the world of commercial software and marketing technology, it was suite versus best of breed, right? This was the debate we heard again and again and again, and the benefit of the suite was, you would get all these tools in the box from a single vendor, and at least in theory, they would work well together. But the disadvantage was, if there were things you wanted that weren't in the box, you were kind of out on your own. Alternatively, you could go with a best of breed strategy of pulling the best products from all of these different companies across the Martech landscape. Phenomenal innovations there, but figuring out how to get all these things to work together, really fell on your shoulders. And when you think about it, neither one of those was a great choice. Like they both had fairly significant, downsides, whichever direction you went. This wasn't the only dichotomy, right? Like if we think about professional services, in marketing and MarTech, there was a very hard line between, are you a software company or are you a services company? And if you were a software company, it was really frowned upon, offering services to your customers. It was almost seen by, VCs funding these things as kind of like cheating away to revenue, versus the theoretically, infinite scalability of software. Vice versa, services companies, most customers were relatively wary about buying software that was built by services companies because they just didn't recognize them as, oh, well, I mean, you're not a software company. And then even in the context of custom software, the dichotomy was this very black and white build versus buy. Are we going to build this whole thing or are we going to buy this whole thing? And there was relatively little blending between the two. And again, just when you think about all these things, it was just like forcing a set of choices that as we moved further and further into a cloud-based digital world, these dichotomies really started to become false choices. And to me, this is what defines the second age of MarTech. That probably has been starting here over a number of years, but I would say here in the 2020s, we've really started to see this pattern coalesce, where instead of suite versus best of breed in commercial software, it's now very much about platform ecosystems. And again, full disclosure, right? This is what I do at HubSpot is, manage their platform ecosystem. But HubSpot's a great example of a company that, its value proposition for a very long time was, oh, we have our suite of our products that we sell you, and that's all you need. But the truth is, that's not all you need. As companies get larger and they have more specialized needs, there's a ton of other potential innovations people want to bring in. And so HubSpot, Salesforce was, an early pioneer in this space, but even with Adobe and Oracle and Microsoft, everyone sort of moved into this world where it's like, yes, we have our foundational platform and we have a bunch of capabilities that we will sell you, building that platform. but it's an open platform, and we have APIs, and not only do we have APIs for this, but we have like partner programs and marketplace programs designed to help you find integrations that are built out of the box with the other apps you want to use. We've seen this, convergence in professional services too. Now certainly software companies have a ton of services that they offer. It's kind of funny. We backed into it with, some different language, like you could almost argue the entire customer success organization is a services organization designed like, hey, listen, we can sell them the software, but if we don't teach them how to actually use this effectively in their business, they're going to churn. You see a number of software companies, certainly, with strong investments in things like, educational programs and academies. HubSpot Academy is one, Salesforce Trailhead is another. And then on the other side of the equation too, you're increasingly seeing these services businesses building on platform ecosystems where they're not just providing services in these ecosystems, they're actually taking a lot of their expertise, bottling it up into packaged products, and selling those packaged products in the marketplaces of these platform ecosystems. And customers are buying it. Customers are like, oh yeah, you are the expert in this particular thing. And it's sort of changing the dynamic now of what we're seeing with some of these services businesses. And then the last piece of that, again, kind of building again on this sort of open platform ecosystem model, is it's less of a build versus buy dichotomy, as it was a decade ago. And it's much more of like, okay, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to be able to leverage, these open commercial platforms that are based in the cloud, but then because they're open, what we want to do is tailor or customize certain capabilities or certain experiences that are built around it, unique to our business. But it is much more a blend of these two things. And so, yeah, I think I would frame the second age of MarTech as a pretty significant mind shift between the X or Y, everything's, either this or it's that, but you can't be both, to a world where increasingly people are finding like, actually I can have the best of both worlds. And it takes us from this, highly siloed view, of the world that we've had to something that's starting to fit a little bit more tightly together. I love alliteration, so I think of this as a journey from silos to symbioses. And so let me stop there. That's I wanted to first put this model out and get feedback, questions.
Cool. Thank you. So far, so good. Anybody has a question, please just raise your hand. So basically to summarize, the thing that it said in the call was that, consolidation hasn't happened. And the convergence is much more transformative than consolidation. And according to you, you're saying that's that significant mindset change, right? That you can now have best of both worlds.
Yes, like, the suite versus best of breed was in some ways like the archetypical consolidation strategy, right? It's like, oh, we can consolidate everything you need into one suite, and there you go. Versus the platform ecosystem view is like, okay, yes, you have consolidated platforms. The platforms themselves are truly becoming a highly consolidated space. But the ecosystems of more specialized software around them is diversifying. And, to give a great analogy for this, again, it's the consumer mobile device space is obviously very different than, B2B software. But, you think about like with the iPhone and Android devices, the moment iOS and Android became these highly consolidated platforms, it was almost because of that high consolidation that they facilitated this incredible diversity of, what's now millions of apps, available around each of them. And again, not to the same degree here in B2B software, but conceptually similar, of saying like having these consolidated platforms with ecosystems around them really does allow you to start to have this diversity of innovation, within the context of a particular platform.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. So let's move to Canada, where I think Sana is ready with a question.
Yep. Thanks, Giannis. And Scott, thank you so much for walking us through this. And I've been following your content for years now, and very privileged to be on a call with you here. So one of the questions I had in mind was this argument between the monolith and composable and the mock architecture. And there's proponents on both sides. And I've always been of the opinion that there is a bit of a conversion there, or convergence there as well, almost similar to what you're talking about in the second age of Martech. But there are people who, say that it's just one or the other. So what's your take on that argument?
Yeah, it's fair. And again, I think part of this is, we have to acknowledge things have changed really rapidly in the world of software. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that technology had these, it moved quickly, but it still had these cycles that you would typically measure in like, oh, this was a 10-year cycle of how this happened. This was another 10-year cycle, 15-year cycle, 20-year cycle. We're in a place right now where the way technology is built and operated in the cloud is going through just this incredibly rapid series of iterations. And so, I completely understand. I mean, for folks who have been in technology for a long time, they bring the mental models, that have worked, over the past 40 years. But I think we're in a place where what is actually possible in this environment is just, it's fundamentally different. And like, it kind of meaning the composability thing kind of boils down to the fact that in the cloud, the moment you start opening up APIs, everything is adjacent to everything else. There really is no like hard barriers between this. Any barriers are just, quite frankly, artificial ones. We create, which have some purpose in, governance and whatnot. But like this ability to say like, yeah, I can pull services and data from, quite frankly, anything, that's an open API inside my organization, or things I do with partners, or things that I'm taking from services, based from, I don't know, AWS or Twilio or Google. This is just a very different environment, and so it's hard for me to see how it's not infinitely composable. It's simply a question of like, are we artificially limiting that composability, and to what end?
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, reflections? I can pick on one or two to get the conversation going, but similar to Sana, don't be shy. I know, Scott, you also have, did you have another slide you wanted to show us? There was one more thing.
Sure, I can,
always saying. One.
Actually, I'll share two quick things here. One is, I pulled this from a McKinsey article recently. I thought it was really interesting because I'm so focused on this concept of ecosystems within software, and specifically ecosystems within marketing. But the truth is, this is a worldview that is being adopted across more and more business strategies, of recognizing that the relationships we have with different companies that are also engaging with our customers or contributing to what we're doing with customers. For a very long time, we used to think of partnerships as these very point-to-point relationships between like a buyer and a supplier, or like, oh, well, I'm, the manufacturer and you're the distributor, But in today's world, there are so many things now where, in software, Jay McBain, who's like one of the channel experts out there, says like, the average customer in, B2B software purchases is being touched by 7 different companies, that are influencing their decision or working with them on this, and so just sort of recognizing like this shift in thinking of business strategy and business management to being an ecosystem view, I think it's really, it is a sea change that's not limited to MarTech. But the one thing I did want to add in here too is, so for years, I've been talking about this dynamic, which Giannis has reminded me is a an evergreen model that has been invented and reinvented many, many times. This idea that technology changes exponentially, more or less. Organizations change logarithmically, much slower, more or less. And this is the big struggle we have between the blue and the yellow is, how do we adapt our companies, in this world? And there's been relatively few silver bullets to this, right? I mean, you can be very intentional about which changes you embrace under the yellow curve. You really have to be. You can try to be more agile than your competitors, which again doesn't mean that your yellow curve suddenly goes all the way up to exponential, but it does mean if your yellow curve is changing faster than your competitor's yellow curve, that may actually be sufficient to win. But this thing I wanted to put off in this slide was this idea that, one of the reasons I think people are leaning into ecosystems, why that stat from Jay McBain about, B2B software buyers, getting touched or influenced from 7 other companies, across an ecosystem, is because this really does provide a way for us to bring more change more quickly into our organization, to lean on a wider variety of inputs, a wider variety of collaborators. People talk a lot here about this shift in software towards more and more community-led growth, and this idea that networking with your other peers becomes one of the best ways to accelerate the successful adoption with software. I think this is all true, and so again, just sort of putting this in the context of, I don't know, you bring an ecosystem, a guy whose title is VP of Platform Ecosystem, you bring him into a call. You can't be surprised that basically everything I'm saying is it's all about the ecosystems, but seriously, I do actually think it is all about the ecosystems.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. We still have time. Thanks also for leaving time for the, I think, very valuable Q&A. Like Stana said, I think it's a privilege to have you with us. We've had the pleasure of also hosting you here in Aarhus, Denmark, and also at a previous peer group meeting in Boston. So normally there's questions, comments, reflections. Perhaps I can jump to Oslo. Ole, what do you think about what you just saw?
Thank you for the introduction. First of all, Scott, nice to meet you. I also followed you for many years. No, I think it makes sense what you present. In a way, we have a mix of best of breed and suite as well. Although we mainly build best of breed, everything we focus on is API connections and building an ecosystem. It's really the way we try to go about things. So to me, it makes sense. I don't have any really questions. I think it's very useful just to see it, see what you present.
So this resonates with the development in your organization. I'm kind of surprised not to see a red plane in your background, Ole.
Yeah, well, when I go off camera, you can see my tail fin here with the plane.
Very good. Anybody else? I can keep picking on people, but if anybody else has comments, reflections, please jump in. One of the things that I think is normally a part of these conversations, Scott, is this first slide you showed with all these tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is it actually an explosion in tools, or to be, I don't want to criticize you, so a lot of respect for all the work you've done, giving back to the community, to the ecosystem? Or is it more so actually like a discovery, like Christopher Columbus discovering, hey, they also have in Norway dedicated Martech vendors, and in Italy, and some of them break out and also are in all the Balkan countries or whatever. Is it really a lot of new vendors arriving?
Yeah, and by the way, all criticism is totally welcome. I had someone the other day ask when I was coming out with the next scrambled egg slide of the industry. I'm like, that's the best description I've heard yet of this. So all good. Yeah, to be fair, it's absolutely a mix. In fact, one of the things we're doing a project right now where we're bringing in data from Clearbit and G2 and some of these different sources so that we can augment the landscape with like more authoritative data on things like, okay, well, when were they founded? How much money did they raise? For things like G2, what sort of like, ratings do they have in marketplaces? Because we recognize that there's a lot of these things that we're just discovering. Now, when did they get launched? Relatively few of them got launched 10 years ago. Like a lot of these have been launched, over like the past 5, 6, 7 years. There's certainly still a ton that got launched, in these past 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
But I think we will have the answer in December here, like with actual
sounds
data on that.
amazing.
But I would say my guess is roughly, it's probably a 50-50 every year of like, ones we discover and ones that are legit.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of new vendors, so that is for sure the case. But there are also some that's been around for a long time. And I remember, we had some conference partners in 2005. They don't exist anymore, so it's a big mix. But really exciting to hear that you're getting that data too. And I'm sure that, there'll be many more vendors out there begging to get on that list. Let's jump to Staten Island, is it, Chris?
Staten Island it is.
Hey, Chris, it's good to see you.
How are you?
Good.
Good work, by the way, not touching my comment about Gartner on Twitter the other day. Very well done. I'm just wondering, just seeing the curve, the organizational change curve, how much is just the vastness of the scrambled egg contributing to the slowness of organizational change and sort of a paralysis by analysis because there's so much there now?
It's certainly a contributor. I'll be honest, my general rule of thumb for better and worse is it's 10% technology and it's 90% people, process, organization, strategy. I mean, even if you just wiped out 80% of the MarTech landscape and you just said, okay, well, there's this 20% of stuff, like, hey, how do we figure out how to use this? For a lot of organizations, like figuring out how to use this is like, it's a huge challenge. And it's not because these companies aren't smart or that the people who are working on them aren't smart. I mean, it's just the quantity of change in what's possible, in MarTech. I mean, I know it's happening elsewhere too. Like, I mean, if you look at like, for instance, like this whole data layer, data ops, what's happening in that world, things around. I mean, those things tangentially related to MarTech. It's just the change is huge, and I think it's a real. I don't have easy answers to it. I mean, I feel like there are things you can do on the margin to get better at it, but I really don't see a silver bullet for like. Has there been some company that's just like nailed this and figured it out and they're like, yeah, we have no stress whatsoever. We're like constantly up to date with everything. All good, thanks.
Technology is not changing fast enough for us.
Yeah, these slow vendors, yeah.
All right, let's jump back to Toronto, Sana.
Yep. Just one other question, Scott. So I've looked at the MarTech landscape in a lot of detail and where everything fits in. Question is whether you've done an exercise or thought about how the categories that you slot vendors into are related to Gartner or Forrester categories, and is there a mapping somewhere? Because I think one of the biggest confusions that I see in the market is exactly what terminology people use to describe software. And if there was alignment on that, that could help. And especially coming from someone like yourself who's done a lot of analysis, you would provide a lot of credibility with that, providing that sort of mapping to the world.
Yeah, it's a really good push. And I will be the first to say, like, the categorization is always been like the single biggest problem with the MarTech landscape. And it's in some ways it's worse for me or better for me, depending on how you look at it, is because we use such broad categories on the MarTech landscape, that in some way, like pick something like whatever, like a category around content marketing. Oh my God, the like variety of different kinds of capabilities, that are just sort of lumped together, in that one big box. It's to the point where it's like, to be honest, I'll admit it's just not useful to anyone to, sort of figure out from a capability perspective. But I do think the Gartners and the Forresters, they also have the same problem too. And I'm torn on that because I feel like there's this tension between analysts or amateur hobby analysts, if that's what my label would be. We do like to put things in boxes, right? We're trying to provide some sort of sense making for like, what is the structure here? But for a lot of these vendors, like, they're trying to defy the box. What they're trying to do is figure out, what is the actual customer problem? How can we solve this better for the customer? And just because these other companies, put themselves in these boxes, or this analyst here said these are the definitions of what these things are, I think some of the most innovative companies in MarTech aren't paying attention to that. They're paying attention to, what do our customers really need? How can we make them more effective? What are the capabilities we do? And when you look at the things they're creating, they tend to actually then span different categories that me or any other analyst has put together. And I actually think that's a good thing. Now, it makes the analyst world like, yeah, basically a nightmare. And for anyone who's trying to look at these analyst things and try and like, piece like, well, how does this company compare to this other company? Yeah, it's really hard. But boy, if we forced all these companies to, be in these really tight boxes, I'm not sure it'd be better, because I'm not sure the box structure we have today is frankly where we should be aspiring to end up.
Yeah, but the issue, I completely agree with you on that note, but the issue is when you are selling the software to an organization who wants to box you into a category. And typically when budgets are decided within larger organizations, they align to specific Gartner or Forrester categories, whoever they're paying basically to, help them figure out how to buy. And so these new companies that are coming up that don't fall squarely into any one of these categories get into trouble because they can't justify to organizations that they should spend money on this new thing that doesn't really squarely fall into anything. And I'm saying that from personal experience, because we're trying to define a new category within this composable architecture, experience orchestration, digital experience composition. Gartner, it calls it DXC. Forrester is starting to use the term experience architecture, but it means slightly different things, and I am thinking, no, it's none of those. It's experience orchestration. I don't believe in any of those, those very tightly defined categories. And so, I'm not sure what to do. It's kind of tough.
Yeah, I fully empathize. I do think, like, and again, this is just my one person's opinion, is I think solving for the actual customer need as the first priority is still like, if there's a ground truth somewhere, that is the ground truth. But then I think, yeah, very often it's marketing's job in this crazy environment to say like, okay, this is what we actually do. But in order to go to market, we have to find ways to map what we do into some of these boxes where, buyers are looking for things, and how do they compare against it. And yeah, it's not easy. I wish I had an easy answer, but it's partly just, I know we're running out of time, but we were talking about the technology change and the organizational change. This is actually a great example of that. Is I think the evolution of what people are building with products is evolving very rapidly. But we have this case on organizational change where the mental models that people have for what are we buying, how are we buying it, those just haven't changed as rapidly as the technology has.
Makes sense.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Sana, Ola, everybody else who contributed, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Learned a ton, took a lot of notes. I'll write it up somehow alongside the slides and share it with all. Thank you once again, Scott. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.